My mother stood in court and said, "We gave you life. That fortune belongs to us." The judge nodded sympathetically. My father sat there looking like the perfect wounded parent. Then I opened the briefcase. 23 years of receipts, every single transaction. Rent statements from when I was 14 years old. Itemized invoices for my own Christmas presents. Interest calculations on loans for school supplies. The judge's pen stopped moving. My mother's lawyer went pale. My father looked at the courtroom doors like he wanted to run. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "let me show you exactly what my parents gave me." What I revealed next made the entire courtroom go silent, and my mother couldn't say a single word. Judge Catherine Morrison had been on the family court bench for 17 years. She'd seen custody battles that turned violent, inheritance disputes that destroyed generations, and prenuptial agreements contested with the ferocity of war. But as I stood before her that morning, briefcase in hand and 23 years of documentation ready to present, I could see in her eyes that she had no idea what was coming. My mother sat beside her attorney, Gregory Hartwell, a man who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hartwell had built his reputation defending elderly parents whose children had stolen their retirement savings. Now he was representing parents trying to steal from their daughter, though he'd framed it differently in his opening statement. Investment recovery, he'd called it. Reimbursement for sacrifices made. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched in a gray suit that had seen better days. He wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the table where his hands lay folded like he was praying. My mother, however, sat straight-backed and defiant, her chin raised in that expression I knew so well from childhood. The look that said she was right, had always been right, and how dare anyone question her. But what they didn't know was that the briefcase I carried contained something that would destroy every lie they'd told their lawyer. My attorney, Rebecca Chen, had wanted to settle out of court. She'd suggested offering them $500,000 just to make it go away, to avoid the media attention and the emotional toll of a public trial. I'd refused. Some things needed to be said out loud, in a place where lies had legal consequences. Judge Morrison reviewed the complaint one more time, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter," she began, addressing my parents formally, "you're claiming that you're entitled to $23.5 million, representing 50% of your daughter's current net worth, based on your investment in her upbringing and the sacrifices you made to ensure her success. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Hartwell answered for them. My clients provided Madison with every advantage: private, tutoring, computer equipment, educational opportunities that cost them significantly. They deferred their own retirement savings, lived frugally, and invested everything in their daughter's future. Now that she's achieved extraordinary success, they're simply asking for recognition of their contribution. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Carter, you're contesting this claim?" "I am, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite my heart hammering against my ribs. "And I'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts my parents' characterization of my childhood and their so-called investment in my future." "Proceed." I opened the briefcase and removed the first binder. 23 years of documentation, organized chronologically, color-coded by category, every receipt preserved in archival quality sheet protectors. The judge had no idea that what I was about to show her would make her question everything she thought she knew about parental duty. "Your Honor, my parents claim they sacrificed for me, that they invested in my future, that they provided advantages. I'd like to show you what they actually provided, and more importantly, what they charged me for it." My mother's face flushed red. "Madison, you can't possibly—" "Mrs. Carter," Judge Morrison interrupted sharply, "you'll have your opportunity to respond. Right now, your daughter has the floor." I handed the first document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "This is a rent agreement dated September 2007. I was 14 years old. My parents informed me that now that I had a part-time job bagging groceries at Safeway, I needed to contribute to household expenses. They charged me $300 a month for rent. Hartwell shifted in his seat. Your Honor, many families ask teenagers to contribute. I'm not finished, I said, and the steel in my voice surprised even me. The rent agreement specifies that this amount covered my bedroom, which I shared with my younger sister Emily, and basic utilities. It did not include food, which was billed separately. Judge Morrison looked up sharply. Billed separately? I handed over the next document, food invoices. My mother kept detailed records of every meal I ate, calculated at grocery cost plus a 20% preparation markup. These invoices were presented to me monthly. When I turned 16 and got a job at the computer repair shop making $11 an hour, the invoices increased to include a 40% markup, which my mother called an overhead fee for maintaining the kitchen. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers as Judge Morrison reviewed the documents. Page after page of itemized food costs. Spaghetti dinner $3.60. Breakfast cereal $1.25. Packed lunch for school $4.15. Month after month, year after year, my own mother had been running a restaurant out of our home, and I was the paying customer, but the invoices were nothing compared to what came next, and I could see my father starting to sweat. Your Honor, I continued, pulling out the next section. My parents claim they provided me with educational advantages. I'd like to show you the loan agreements they had me sign for those advantages. Hartwell was on his feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a daughter with a vendetta trying to— Sit down, Mr. Hartwell, Judge Morrison said, her voice like ice. I want to see these loan agreements. I handed over a stack of documents, each one notarized, each one bearing my teenage signature, next to interest rate calculations that would make a payday lender blush. When I was 15, I wanted to take an advanced computer programming course at the community college. The course cost $400. My parents agreed to pay for it, but they had me sign a loan agreement with 18% annual interest, compounded monthly. My mother found her voice. We were teaching her about financial responsibility. You were charging your 15-year-old daughter 18% interest on an educational loan, Judge Morrison said flatly, and I heard the shift in her tone. The sympathy she'd entered this courtroom with was evaporating like morning fog under harsh sunlight. Continue, Ms. Carter. The programming course was just the beginning, I said, feeling stronger now, feeling the power of truth that had been locked inside me for 23 years finally being released. Every textbook I needed for advanced classes, every graphing calculator, every school supply beyond the basic notebooks and pens, all of it was structured as a loan with interest. By the time I graduated high school, I owed my parents $42,000. The judge's pen had stopped moving. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Horror, maybe, or disbelief that parents could actually do this to their own child. I pulled out the next binder, this one thicker than the others. Your Honor, I'd like to present the birthday and Christmas present invoices. I'm sorry, Judge Morrison said, removing her glasses to look at me directly. Did you say present invoices? Yes, Your Honor. Every gift my parents gave me from age 13 onward came with an invoice, due within 30 days. I have them all here. I began laying them out on the table in front of the judge. Birthday presents itemized down to the wrapping paper and card. A laptop for my 16th birthday, 30-day invoice for $950. Christmas presents from age 14 through age 22, each gift carefully documented with retail price, often including a handling fee for the time spent shopping. My mother was crying now, but they weren't the sympathetic tears she'd displayed earlier. These were angry tears, the tears of someone being exposed, someone watching their carefully constructed narrative collapse under the weight of evidence. Your Honor, Hartwell tried again, his voice less confident now. Even if these documents are authentic, and I'm not conceding that they They simply show parents trying to teach their daughter the value of money and financial independence. At 18% interest? Judge Morrison's voice could have cut glass. Charging a child for birthday presents, billing a teenager for food at a 40% markup? What I said next made my father actually stand up, like he was going to leave the courtroom. Your Honor, I need to address the part of their complaint that claims they deferred their own retirement savings to invest in me. I have documentation that proves this is categorically false. I pulled out a folder I'd been saving, the one I'd obtained through a forensic accountant after receiving their lawsuit. These are my parents' financial statements from 2005 through 2015, the years they claim they were sacrificing for my future. During this period, my father's income as an insurance adjuster averaged $92,000 annually. My mother worked part-time as a bookkeeper, earning an additional $30,000 per year. Combined annual household income of $122,000. Judge Morrison was leaning forward now, fully engaged in what I was revealing. My parents' lawyer had gone very quiet, probably realizing that his clients hadn't been entirely forthcoming about their financial situation. During these same 10 years, I continued, pulling out highlighted bank statements, my parents took vacations to Hawaii twice, purchased a $32,000 boat, remodeled their kitchen at a cost of $48,000, and maintained 2 leased luxury vehicles. Meanwhile, I was paying them rent, being charged for food, and accumulating debt at 18% interest for school supplies. But, Your Honor, I said, and I felt my voice begin to shake with the emotion I'd been holding back. The worst part isn't the money they charged me. The worst part is what they did with the money I paid them. I opened the final folder, and what it contained would change everything my parents had claimed about sacrifice and investment. These are deposit records showing that every payment I made to my parents, every rent check, every loan repayment, every invoice I paid for food and gifts, all of it was deposited into an account they called the Madison Fund. My parents' lawyer mentioned this account in the discovery documents, claiming it was evidence of their investment in my future, money they'd set aside for my benefit. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. And what happened to this Madison Fund? In December 2019, 3 months after I sold my first software company for $18 million, my parents emptied the Madison Fund, all $68,000 of it. They used $45,000 to pay off the boat they'd purchased. The remaining $23,000 went toward a timeshare in Cabo San Lucas. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys as she stared at me. So to be clear, Judge Morrison said, her voice very quiet now, very controlled, you paid your parents approximately $68,000 over 9 years, money they claimed was being invested in your future, and they spent it on luxury purchases for themselves? Yes, Your Honor. The Madison Fund was never for me. It was a way to extract money from me while making themselves feel better about it. They could tell themselves they were teaching me responsibility while funding their lifestyle with my teenage wages. My father was crying now, too, but unlike my mother's angry tears, his were the tears of someone facing consequences they'd convinced themselves would never come. He'd been the one who insisted on the interest calculations, who'd sat me down at 15 with a financial calculator, showing me how compound interest worked on my educational loans. He'd been so proud of teaching me about money. He'd never considered that I might remember every lesson, might document every transaction, might one day use his own tactics against him. Hartwell was shuffling through his notes desperately, looking for some angle he could use to salvage this disaster. Your Honor, my clients may have made unconventional choices in how they approached parenting, but that doesn't change the fundamental fact that they provided Madison with a home, with stability, with the foundation she needed to become successful. Mr. Hartwell, I interrupted, and this time the judge didn't stop me. Let me tell the court about the foundation my parents provided. I didn't need documents for this part. These memories were burned into my brain with perfect clarity. When I was 17, I created my first piece of software, a security protocol for small businesses. I worked on it for 8 months, every evening after school and my job at the computer shop, every weekend while other kids my age were at parties or football games. When I finally finished it and started making sales, earning about $2,000 a month, my parents sat me down for a family meeting. What they said to me that night was something I'd never told anyone, and hearing it out loud would make the judge understand everything. They told me that since I was living under their roof, using their internet connection to develop my software, using the electricity to power my computer, they were entitled to 40% of my earnings as a licensing fee for use of their resources. They had me sign an agreement. I was 17 years old, still in high school, and I signed an agreement giving my parents 40% of everything I earned from software I'd created. Judge Morrison's face had gone from surprised to shocked to something beyond shock. She was looking at my parents now with barely concealed disgust. That licensing agreement continued until I was 22, I said. Even after I moved out at 19, even after I was supporting myself completely, my parents claimed that since I'd developed the original code while living in their house, they had perpetual rights to 40% of any derivative works. I paid them because I was young and because they convinced me it was fair, that I owed them, that without their roof over my head, I'd never have succeeded. Over 5 years, I paid my parents approximately $260,000 in licensing fees for the privilege of having been their daughter while I created something valuable. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Hartwell's face had gone gray. My mother was staring at me with an expression I'd seen before, the look she'd given me when I was 16 and had dared to question why I was being charged for my own birthday cake. It was the look of someone who believed that children were investments that should provide returns, and how dare I suggest otherwise. Your Honor, I continued, my voice steady now, empowered by finally speaking truth that had been silenced for so long. My parents claim in their lawsuit that they sacrificed for me, that they invested in my future. The reality is that I was never their daughter. I was a business venture. Every dollar they spent on me came with interest and payment terms. Every gift came with an invoice. Every opportunity came with a contract. I pulled out one final document, the one I'd been saving for this moment. This is a letter my mother wrote to me when I was 24, after I refused to give them 40% of a new software contract I'd negotiated. She sent it to me, certified mail. Like all our family communications by that point, were legal documents. I began to read, my voice catching only slightly on the words that had cut me so deeply when I'd first received them. Madison, your ingratitude is staggering. After everything we invested in you, after every sacrifice we made, you have the audacity to keep money that rightfully belongs to this family. You seem to have forgotten that we gave you life itself. Without us, you would be nothing. Every opportunity you've had, every success you've achieved, exists because we chose to have you, to raise you, to provide for you. You owe us. You will always owe us. And if you don't fulfill your obligations to this family, you'll find out what it's like to lose the only people who will ever truly support you. Judge Morrison held out her hand for the letter. She read it slowly, twice, then set it down on her desk, with the careful precision of someone controlling their anger. Mrs. Carter, she said, addressing my mother directly, do you stand by what you wrote in this letter? My mother lifted her chin, that defiant expression still in place, despite everything that had been revealed. I was angry when I wrote that. Madison was keeping money that should have gone to family. Money she earned, Judge Morrison interrupted. Money from work she did, software she created, contracts she negotiated, money that by law belonged to her and her alone. We gave her life, my mother said, and there was no compromise in her voice, no recognition that anything she'd done might have been wrong. That has value. That should be recognized. And that's when I said the thing that made the judge go pale, and my mother finally, finally unable to speak. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "I'd like to read the cost breakdown my parents presented me with on my 18th birthday. They called it a lifetime investment analysis." I pulled out the document, my hands shaking slightly now because this was the moment I'd been building toward, the evidence that would destroy any remaining sympathy anyone might have had for the people who claimed to be victims in this courtroom. My parents created a spreadsheet calculating every expense associated with my existence from birth through age 18. Hospital delivery costs, $7,000. Formula and baby food, approximately $9,000 over 2 years. Diapers, $4,000. Clothing, averaged at $1,000 per year for 18 years. Medical expenses, insurance premiums allocated to me, dental work, eye exams, glasses, groceries, calculated at 30% of household food budget. Housing costs, 1/4 of mortgage and utilities. Transportation costs for school and activities. Every single expense itemized and totaled. Judge Morrison was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "What was the total?" $432,000, I said. "That's what my parents calculated it cost them to raise me to adulthood. And on my 18th birthday, they presented me with this analysis along with a payment plan. They wanted me to reimburse them $432,000 in monthly installments of $1,500 at 12% annual interest over 30 years. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff actually gasped. The court reporter's hands flew to her mouth. Hartwell was trying to speak, but no words were coming out. And Judge Morrison's face had gone completely pale, all the blood draining away as she processed what she'd just heard. My mother tried to stand, but her lawyer pulled her back down. My father had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "You wanted your 18-year-old daughter," Judge Morrison said slowly, each word carefully enunciated, "to sign a 30-year loan agreement to reimburse you for the cost of raising her?" "We thought it was fair," my father said, his voice barely audible. "We'd provided for her. We'd given her everything. We deserved to be paid back." "You deserved," Judge Morrison repeated, and the contempt in her voice was unmistakable. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, do you understand that children are not business ventures? That the decision to have a child creates a legal and moral obligation to provide for that child without expectation of financial repayment?" "We went beyond basic provision," my mother said, finding her voice again, stubborn to the end. "We gave her opportunities. We invested in her potential. That investment should have returns." "I didn't sign the payment plan," I said, into the silence that followed my mother's statement. That's when our relationship really ended, when I refused to agree that I owed them $432,000 for being born, for being raised, for being their daughter. They told me I was selfish, ungrateful, that I was betraying the family. My mother told me I was dead to her until I agreed to honor my debts. I looked at my parents then, really looked at them for the first time since entering the courtroom. I paid them anyway, not because I agreed I owed them, but because I wanted to be free. Over the next 6 years, I sent them $2,000 a month. I paid back every invoice, every loan, every licensing fee, every cent of their lifetime investment analysis. I paid them back $144,000, every payment documented with a memo line that said, "For being your daughter." When I'd finally paid what they'd demanded, I wrote them a letter. I told them I considered my debt to them satisfied. I told them I was done. I would have no further contact with them. They were no longer my parents, and I was no longer their daughter. I was simply a former client who had fulfilled her financial obligations and was closing the account. What happened next made everyone in that courtroom realize this case was over before it began. Judge Morrison stood up, and everyone rose automatically. She looked at my parents with an expression of such profound disappointment that it seemed to physically diminish them. "I'm calling a recess," she said. "Mr. Hartwell, I suggest you speak with your clients about withdrawing this lawsuit. because if we proceed, I will not only dismiss this case with prejudice, I will refer your clients to the district attorney for potential fraud charges related to the financial exploitation of a minor." The gavel came down like thunder, and I watched my parents' lawyer usher them quickly out of the courtroom, my mother still trying to argue, still convinced somehow that she'd been wronged, that she was the victim in this story she'd written, where children were investments and love came with payment plans and interest rates. Rebecca Chen put her hand on my shoulder as the courtroom cleared. "Madison," she said softly, "I have represented clients in family law for 22 years. I have never, ever seen anything like what you just presented in there." "Do you think they'll withdraw?" I asked. She looked toward the door where my parents had disappeared. "If they have any sense at all, yes. But I don't think sense has ever been their strong suit, has it?" She was right. 2 hours later, Hartwell called Rebecca to say his clients were refusing to withdraw. They wanted to continue with the trial. They wanted to present their side, to explain how everything I'd shown the judge was taken out of context, how I was twisting their attempts at financial education into something sinister. My mother, Hartwell said with barely concealed exasperation, insisted that the judge would understand once she heard the full story, once she understood how much they'd sacrificed, how ungrateful I'd been, how I'd turned my back on family over money that should have flowed naturally from child to parent in recognition of the debt every child owed for life itself. "They want their day in court," Rebecca said after hanging up. "Judge Morrison scheduled us to reconvene tomorrow morning. Madison, are you prepared for what comes next?" I thought about the final pieces of evidence still in my briefcase. The therapy records documenting the trauma of growing up as a business transaction. The expert testimony I'd arranged from child psychologists about the long-term effects of financial exploitation by parents. The character witnesses I'd prepared, people who'd known me through the years and could testify to the reality of my relationship with my parents. "I'm prepared," I said. "Are they?" Rebecca smiled grimly. "They have no idea what's coming." The next morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I stood in front of my hotel mirror, adjusting my navy suit, the one I'd worn when I pitched to venture capitalists who'd eventually funded my second company. Power dressing, my business partner Sarah had called it. Today I needed that power, needed every advantage I could claim in a courtroom where my own parents would try one more time to convince a judge that I owed them millions for the crime of being born. Rebecca met me in the courthouse lobby at 8:30, carrying 2 additional briefcases I hadn't seen yesterday. "The character witnesses arrived this morning," she said. "Dr. Patricia Hendricks flew in from Chicago. Your college roommate Jennifer is here. And Madison, your sister Emily, is in the witness room." That stopped me cold. "Emily's here? She agreed to testify?" "She called me last night after seeing the news coverage, said she had things the court needed to hear." Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral. "I interviewed her for 2 hours. Madison, what she's prepared to say, it corroborates everything you presented yesterday and adds context that will be very difficult for your parents to explain away." Emily, my little sister who'd been 12 when I left home, who'd still been young enough to believe our parents' version of family, who'd grown up in the same house but had somehow emerged with her illusions intact. Or so I'd thought. What Emily knew about our parents would either save them or destroy them completely, and I had no idea which way she'd lean. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock, her expression giving nothing away. My parents sat beside Hartwell, looking smaller than yesterday, my mother's defiant posture replaced with something closer to resignation. But her eyes, when they met mine, still held that familiar spark of righteousness, that absolute certainty that she was justified in everything she'd done. "Mr. Hartwell," Judge Morrison began, "has your client's position changed since yesterday's recess?" Hartwell stood slowly. "Your Honor, my clients wish to proceed. They believe there's been significant mischaracterization of their parenting approach, and they'd like the opportunity to provide context for the financial arrangements Ms. Carter presented." Very well. Judge Morrison settled back in her chair. Miss Carter, you may call your first witness. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Patricia Hendricks. Dr. Hendricks was exactly what you'd imagine a child psychologist with 30 years of experience to look like, gray hair pulled back in a professional bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression of calm authority. She'd reviewed all my documentation over the past 3 weeks, had interviewed me for 6 hours, and had prepared a report that Rebecca assured me would be devastating. After the preliminaries establishing her credentials, Rebecca got to the point. Dr. Hendricks, you've reviewed the financial documentation Ms. Carter presented yesterday. In your professional opinion, what do these arrangements represent? Objection, Hartwell said half-heartedly. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, Dr. Hendricks is an expert witness testifying about patterns of behavior within her area of expertise, Rebecca countered. Overruled. Dr. Hendricks, you may answer. Dr. Hendricks turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, what these documents represent is a clear pattern of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. The behavior described, charging a child rent, billing them for food, creating loan agreements with interest for educational expenses, treating gifts as transactions requiring payment, this is not unconventional parenting. This is parentification combined with financial abuse. She pulled out her own report, pages marked with colored tabs. Children have developmental needs that include unconditional love, security, and the feeling that they belong to a family unit without conditions. When parents impose transactional relationships on children, particularly with financial components that create debt and obligation, it fundamentally damages the child's sense of self-worth and security. In Miss Carter's case, the damage is extensive. She was taught from age 14 that her value was purely economic, that love and family connection were conditional upon payment, that her very existence was a debt she could never fully repay. The psychological term for what her parents did is financial incest, and what I discovered about how this affected Madison's development would shock anyone who heard it. My mother made a sound of protest, but Hartwell put a hand on her arm, silencing her. Can you explain that term, Dr. Hendricks? Rebecca asked. Financial incest occurs when parents inappropriately involve children in adult financial concerns, treating them as financial partners or resources rather than dependents. It's a form of boundary violation that treats the child as an extension of the parent's financial needs rather than as an individual with their own developmental requirements. Dr. Hendricks looked down at her notes. Ms. Carter reported that she experienced her first panic attack at age 16 when she couldn't make her rent payment to her parents on time. She described feeling that her place in the family was contingent on her ability to pay. She developed insomnia, worrying about the accumulating interest on her educational loans. She told me she used to hide in the school bathroom during lunch rather than go home and eat food she'd have to pay for. The courtroom was silent except for Dr. Hendricks's calm, clinical voice describing the nightmare of my adolescence in terms that made it sound exactly as horrifying as it had felt. Dr. Hendricks, Rebecca continued, the plaintiffs claim they were teaching their daughter financial responsibility and the value of money. What's your professional assessment of that claim? It's a rationalization for exploitative behavior, Dr. Hendricks said bluntly. Teaching financial responsibility involves age-appropriate lessons like having a savings account, learning to budget an allowance, perhaps paying for certain luxuries beyond necessities. It does not involve charging rent to a 14-year-old. It does not involve 18% interest on educational loans. It absolutely does not involve presenting a child with a $432,000 bill on their 18th birthday for the cost of raising them. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an edge of anger I suspected she rarely displayed in her professional capacity. Your Honor, what Ms. Carter's parents did was create a family structure where their daughter was essentially an indentured servant, working to pay off a debt she never agreed to incur, the debt of being born. Hartwell's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to suggest that Dr. Hendricks was biased because I was paying for her testimony, tried to argue that different families had different approaches to finances, tried to claim that without interviewing my parents, she couldn't make a fair assessment. But Dr. Hendricks calmly demolished each argument, pointing out that abuse didn't become acceptable just because it happened within a family structure, that her opinions were based on 30 years of research and clinical practice, not on who was paying her fee. When Dr. Hendricks stepped down, Rebecca called Jennifer Walsh, my college roommate from MIT. Jennifer was now a successful software engineer at Google, and she'd witnessed some of my worst moments during those years when I was trying to pay my parents while also paying for college. "Tell the court about the incident in March 2013, Rebecca said, after establishing Jennifer's relationship to me. Jennifer's voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. Madison and I were roommates our junior year. One evening I came back to our dorm and found her having a complete breakdown. She was hyperventilating, couldn't catch her breath, and when I finally got her calm enough to talk, she told me her parents had sent her a legal demand letter. Do you know what the letter demanded? They wanted $3,500 immediately. Madison had missed 2 months of her licensing fee payments because she'd been using that money to buy textbooks and pay for food. The letter threatened to sue her for breach of contract and told her that if she didn't pay within 10 days, they'd also charge her a late fee penalty of $750. Jennifer looked at my parents, her expression a mix of pity and disgust. She was 20 years old. She was working 20 hours a week at an internship, taking 18 credit hours, and barely sleeping because she was so stressed about money. And her parents were threatening to sue her for $3,500. I watched her have panic attacks 3 times a week that semester. I watched her skip meals to save money. I watched her work herself to exhaustion trying to satisfy parents who treated her like a debtor instead of a daughter. Did you ever meet Ms. Carter's parents? Once, during Parents' Weekend our senior year. They came to take Madison to dinner, and I happened to be there when they arrived. What Mrs. Carter said to Madison within 30 seconds of seeing her was something I'll never forget, and it explains everything about their relationship. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, probably remembering that weekend, probably knowing what was coming. "What did she say?" Rebecca asked. She looked at Madison, and before even saying hello, before asking how she was or how classes were going, she said, "You look like you've gained weight. That's going to cost you more in food invoices this month." Then she laughed like it was a joke, but Madison's face just crumbled. I realized then that every interaction they had was transactional. Even commenting on her appearance was framed in terms of money. Hartwell had no questions for Jennifer. What could he ask? How could he make that interaction sound like anything other than what it was? Rebecca called 2 more character witnesses, people who'd known me through my 20s, and could testify to the toll my parents' financial exploitation had taken. Then she said the words I'd been both hoping for and dreading. "Your Honor, the defense calls Emily Carter." My sister walked into the courtroom, and I barely recognized her. 23 now, she'd grown from the 12-year-old I remembered into a woman who looked exhausted and determined in equal measure. She didn't look at our parents as she walked to the witness stand. She kept her eyes on me, and in her expression I saw an apology that spanned 11 years. After she was sworn in, Rebecca began gently. "Miss Carter, you're Madison's younger sister, correct?" "Yes." "Can you tell the court about your relationship with your parents growing up?" Emily took a deep breath. "For a long time I thought I had a normal family. I knew Maddie paid rent and had some kind of arrangement with Mom and Dad about money, but they told me it was because she'd asked to learn about financial responsibility. They made it sound like it was her idea, like she wanted to be treated as an adult." "When did you learn the truth?" "When I turned 14. I got a job babysitting in the neighborhood, and I was excited to have my own money. The day after my first paycheck, Dad sat me down with rental agreement forms. He told me it was time for me to contribute to the household like Maddie had. I was confused because I remembered Maddie leaving home when I was 12, remembered the fights, but I'd always been told she left because she was selfish and ungrateful. Now suddenly I was being handed the same rental agreement she'd been given. Emily's voice cracked slightly. I signed it because I didn't know I could say no. I thought this was just what families did. But then the food invoices started, then the loan agreements for school supplies, and I realized Maddie hadn't been ungrateful. She'd been exploited, and now it was my turn. My mother was crying silently, tears running down her face, but whether they were tears of shame or self-pity, I couldn't tell. "Emily," Rebecca said quietly, "did your parents ever present you with a lifetime investment analysis like they did with Madison?" "Yes, on my 18th birthday, just like they did with her. They calculated that raising me cost them $468,000. It was more than Maddie's because they said costs had gone up over the years. They wanted me to sign a 30-year payment plan." "Did you sign it?" Emily's answer would reveal something about our parents that even I hadn't known, something that made everything they'd done even worse. "No, I refused, and that's when Mom told me something I'll never forget. She said that Maddie had already paid them back $144,000, that she'd been a good daughter in the end, despite her attitude, and that I needed to do the same if I wanted to remain part of the family. She showed me spreadsheets of Maddie's payments, every $2,000 check documented with the memo line, "For being your daughter." Emily looked at me then, tears streaming down her face. "Maddie, I didn't know you'd actually paid them. I thought when you left you just cut them off. I didn't realize you'd given them years of payments trying to buy your freedom from this insanity." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, what happened when you refused to sign the payment plan?" "They told me I had to move out. I was 18, just graduated high school, and they gave me 30 days to find somewhere else to live. But before I left, I did something Maddie had taught me years ago, even though I didn't understand why at the time. I documented everything." Emily pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "I have 7 years of documentation, every rent payment, every food invoice, every loan agreement. But I also have something Maddie didn't have. I have recordings." The courtroom went electric. Hartwell was on his feet. "Your Honor, we were not informed about any recordings." "Because I didn't give them to Madison's lawyer until this morning," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "I wasn't sure I was going to testify at all, but then I read the news coverage of yesterday's testimony, and I realized someone needed to prove that what Maddie said was real, that she wasn't exaggerating or mischaracterizing anything. These recordings prove everything." Judge Morrison looked at Rebecca. "Counselor, do you have these recordings?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've reviewed them, and I believe they're highly relevant to the case. They were recorded by Ms. Emily Carter in her own home with her own parents, which is legal under California's one-party consent laws for recording." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison said. "But Mr. Hartwell, you'll have an opportunity to review the recordings before your clients testify. We'll take a 30-minute recess." During the recess, Rebecca played portions of the recordings for Hartwell and my parents in a conference room. Through the door, I could hear my mother's voice rising in pitch, arguing that the recordings were taken out of context, that Emily had manipulated them somehow. But when they returned to the courtroom, my parents looked defeated. Hartwell looked like a man who just realized his clients had lied to him about everything. When court resumed, Rebecca played the first recording. Emily's voice, younger, asking Mom and Dad why they charged her and Maddie for everything when her friend's parents didn't do that. My father's response, cold and matter-of-fact. "Emily, your sister and you are investments. We put resources into you expecting returns. That's how the world works. When you have children someday, you'll understand that they're supposed to take care of you when you're older. We're just making that explicit rather than leaving it to chance." The second recording was worse. My mother explaining to 16-year-old Emily why she couldn't go to the prom. "The dress costs $300, Emily. That's $300 you'll owe us, plus interest. Do you really want to add to your debt for one evening? Is a dance really worth years of payments? You need to start thinking about your financial future, about what you owe this family. Maddie never thought about that, and look how selfish she turned out. But the third recording was the one that made Judge Morrison's face go from pale to something approaching fury, and it revealed the real reason my parents were suing me for millions. Emily's voice, just 6 months ago, talking to our parents about their lawsuit plans. You're really going to sue Maddie for half her money, after everything you already took from her? My father's voice, jovial, like he was discussing a successful business deal. She owes us, sweetie. We created her success. Without us, she'd be nothing. And frankly, we deserve to enjoy our retirement. Do you know she's worth $47 million now? Half of that is ours by right. We invested in her. We're just claiming our returns. My mother's voice chimed in. And once we get the money from Madison, you'll be next, Emily. You've been much less successful than your sister, but you still have that little graphic design business. We calculated that we're owed at least $200,000 from you. We were going to wait until after we settled with Madison, but now you know. You can start making plans to pay us back. Emily's voice on the recording was shaking. You're going to sue us both? Your own daughters? Sue is such an ugly word, my mother said. We're just collecting what we're owed. What any parent should be owed after raising children in today's economy. It's only fair. The recording ended. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my mother sobbing. But these were different tears now. These were the tears of someone who'd just heard their own words, played back, and finally understood how they sounded to everyone else. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was tired and sad. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you believe your daughters owe you money for raising them? My father couldn't seem to speak. My mother, ever defiant, lifted her chin one more time. Yes, we do. We gave them life. We gave them opportunities. Children should take care of their parents. It's natural. It's right. It's abuse, Judge Morrison said flatly. It's exploitation. It's treating human beings you chose to bring into this world as investment properties with expected returns. She shuffled the papers in front of her. Mr. Hartwell, does your client wish to testify on her own behalf? Hartwell looked at my mother, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. I think we've heard enough. Very well. Judge Morrison pulled out a legal pad and began writing. The scratching of her pen was the only sound in the courtroom for 5 full minutes. When she finally looked up, her expression was granite. I'm issuing my ruling from the bench. The plaintiff's claim for $23.5 million is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering the plaintiffs to repay Madison Carter the sum of $144,000 she paid them over 6 years, plus interest calculated at the same 18% rate they charged her for educational loans. That comes to approximately $206,000. My mother gasped. My father's head dropped into his hands, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential financial exploitation of minors. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, what you did to your daughters may constitute criminal behavior. That will be for the DA to determine. She looked at me then, and her expression softened slightly. Ms. Carter, I want you to know that the court recognizes the courage it took to present this evidence, to expose family dysfunction in such a public forum. You were not obligated to pay your parents anything. The fact that you did so demonstrates either extraordinary kindness or extraordinary trauma, possibly both. I hope you'll use some of your considerable resources to continue the therapy Dr. Hendricks recommended. The gavel came down with finality. This court is adjourned. Rebecca was shaking my hand, congratulating me, but I was watching Emily navigate through the crowd toward me. When she reached me, we stood there for a long moment, 2 sisters who'd been pitted against each other by parents who saw children as profit centers, who'd survived the same exploitation years apart. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, Doll, Emily whispered. I'm sorry I believed them about you for so long. You were 12 when I left, I said, pulling her into a hug. You were a child. They manipulated you just like they manipulated me. What they said on that recording, Emily said, pulling back to look at me. About coming after me next. Maddie, I have $32,000 in savings. That's it. They were going to sue me for $200,000 I don't have. They're not going to sue anyone ever again, I said firmly. And Emily, you don't need to worry about money. You're my sister, my actual sister, not an investment property or a business venture. If you need help, I'm here. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. News of the case had spread overnight, local media picking up on the sensational details of parents suing their daughter for millions. Rebecca handled most of the questions, but one reporter called out directly to me. Ms. Carter, do you have any message for parents who might be considering similar financial arrangements with their children? I stopped and turned back to face the cameras. What I said next would go viral within hours, shared millions of times by people who'd experienced similar exploitation and finally had words for what had happened to them. Children are not investments, I said clearly. They're not business ventures with expected returns. They're human beings you choose to bring into this world, and that choice creates obligations that run one direction. Parents are obligated to provide for children. Children are not obligated to provide returns on that investment because it's not an investment. It's called being a parent. I took a breath, thinking about 14-year-old me signing rental agreements, 16-year-old me crying over food invoices, 18-year-old me being presented with a $432,000 bill for existing. If you're treating your children as financial resources, if you're charging them for basic necessities, if you're creating debt and obligations where there should be love and security, you're not teaching them responsibility. You're teaching them that they're only valuable for what they can provide. You're teaching them that love is conditional on payment. You're damaging them in ways that will take years of therapy to heal. My parents sued me for half my fortune because they genuinely believe I owe them for being born. They believe that so deeply that they were willing to destroy whatever relationship we had left in pursuit of money they have no legal or moral right to claim. But what they taught me, accidentally, was something they never intended, and it's the reason I'm standing here today having won. The reporters leaned in, cameras focusing tight on my face. They taught me to document everything, every receipt, every transaction, every agreement, every conversation. They taught me that words mean nothing without evidence, that feelings don't matter in the face of facts, that the truth is only as strong as your ability to prove it. They taught me these lessons so I would understand business and contracts and financial obligation. But I used those lessons to prove exactly what they'd done to me. Their own tactics, their own obsessive documentation became the evidence that destroyed their case. I smiled then, not with happiness, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd survived something they shouldn't have had to survive. So to any parents considering this approach, know that you might create a child who's very, very good at keeping records, and those records might not tell the story you think they tell. 6 weeks later, the district attorney's office decided not to press criminal charges. The statute of limitations had run out on most of the exploitation from my childhood, and proving criminal intent for the rest would be difficult, given that my parents had convinced themselves their behavior was justified. But the DA did send them a strongly worded letter about parental obligations and the legal definition of child abuse, which included financial exploitation. My parents never contacted me after the trial. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no attempt to repair what they'd broken. Emily told me they'd moved to Arizona, quietly, trying to escape the media attention and the social shame of being exposed as parents who'd billed their children for birthday presents. Emily and I had lunch every Sunday now, slowly building the relationship we should have had all along. She'd closed her graphic design business and come to work for my company as creative director, not because she needed me to rescue her, but because she was talented and we worked well together. Two sisters who'd survived the same nightmare, finally on the same side. One Sunday, over Thai food in downtown Palo Alto, Emily asked the question I'd been waiting for. Do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong? I thought about my mother's face in the courtroom, that defiant chin lift even as evidence of her exploitation piled up around her. I thought about my father's tears, which seemed to be more about getting caught than about actual remorse. I thought about that recording where they'd casually discussed suing both their daughters for money they believed they were owed simply for being parents. No, I said finally. I don't think they'll ever understand. They've built their entire identity around this narrative where children owe parents, where family is a transaction, where love comes with interest rates and payment plans. Admitting they were wrong would mean admitting they damaged us on purpose, that they hurt their own children for money. That's too big a thing to face. Does that bother you? Emily asked. I considered the question honestly. Did it bother me that my parents would never apologize, never acknowledge the harm they'd caused, never see me as anything more than an ungrateful daughter who'd refused to pay her debts? It used to, I admitted. For years I wanted them to understand, to see what they'd done, to feel sorry. But I realized something during the trial. I don't need their understanding. I don't need their apology. I don't need their validation that I was right, to refuse to be treated as an investment property. I pulled out my phone and showed Emily the news article that had run that morning. Forbes' profile on the top 50 women in tech under 35. My face on the cover, the headline reading, Madison Carter, the entrepreneur who documented her way to freedom. I have this, I said. I have a company I built myself. I have wealth I earned through my own work. I have employees who respect me, investors who trust me, clients who value what I create. I have you, finally, as my sister instead of my competitor for our parents' conditional approval. I have a life where no one charges me rent for existing, where gifts don't come with invoices, where love isn't measured in interest rates. Emily smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. You documented your way to freedom. That's actually perfect. They taught me that, I said. They just didn't realize I'd use those skills against them instead of for them. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. The $206,000 payment from my parents had cleared. The money they owed me for the payments I'd made trying to buy my freedom, plus 18% interest compounded monthly, exactly as they'd charged me for educational loans. I transferred the full amount to Emily with a memo line that read, "For being my sister," not because she needed it, though it would help her save for the house she wanted to buy, but because I wanted her to know that family, real family, didn't come with invoices and payment plans. Real family gave without expecting returns. Real family loved without calculating cost. That night, alone in my Palo Alto house that I'd bought with money I'd earned, I pulled out the box I kept in my office safe. Inside were all the original documents, the rental agreements, the food invoices, the loan papers with their 18% interest rates, the birthday present bills, the lifetime investment analysis demanding $432,000 for raising me. Every piece of evidence that had destroyed my parents' lawsuit and exposed their exploitation. I could have thrown them away after the trial. Rebecca had digital copies, the court had copies. I didn't need the originals anymore, but I kept them as a reminder, not of what had been done to me, but of what I'd survived, of how I'd turned their own weapons against them, of how documentation and truth and evidence could overcome even the most manipulative narrative. My parents had tried to teach me that children were investments, that love was transactional, that family was about debt and obligation and returns on investment. But what they actually taught me was that the truth, backed by irrefutable evidence, was more powerful than any lie, no matter how convinced the liars were of their own righteousness. They'd tried to sue me for millions, claiming they'd invested in my success and deserved their returns. Instead, they'd proven in open court that they'd exploited their own children, that they'd treated us as profit centers rather than people, that they'd damaged us in ways that would take years to heal. And in the end, they had to pay me, not the other way around. $206,000, calculated at exactly the same interest rate they'd charged me when I was a child trying to buy textbooks for school. The universe had its own sense of justice, and sometimes that justice came with 18% interest compounded monthly. I locked the box back in the safe and returned to my life. The life I'd built despite them, not because of them. The life where I was finally, completely free. If Madison's victory over exploitation left you satisfied, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments what moment hit you hardest. Was it the 18% interest, the birthday present invoices, or that final recording where her parents planned to sue both daughters? Subscribe for more stories of justice, vindication, and people who document their way to freedom. Don't miss the next upload.